The steel corridor vibrated with the hum of the submarine's engines when it happened. No warning. No protocol. Just raw authority turning violent. The Admiral slammed her back against the bulkhead so hard the impact rattled the pipes above her head. His forearm drove across her throat, pinning her to cold metal with the full weight of a man who'd forgotten every rule of restraint. Her boots scraped against the deck. Her oxygen thinned instantly. Her fingers clawed at his wrist. Desperate, instinctive, but his arm was a granite bar crushing her windpipe. Behind him, sailors crowded the narrow passageway. Some laughed. Some pointed. One even clapped like it was a show. In the tight confines of the sub, their boots echoed like mockery. She tapped his forearm once. Clear signal, release. He ignored it. She tapped twice, the emergency tap every service member is trained to obey. Instead of releasing, he leaned in, tightened, smiled. And then he whispered, low enough for only her to hear. Never forget who I am. What he didn't know, what none of them knew, was that she let him do it. She needed him to cross the line. She needed witnesses. She needed proof. Because the moment a Navy SEAL stepped out from the shadows of that corridor, the drill, the laughter, the Admiral's power, snapped in half. Before we continue, like this video, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Because what happened next shook the entire submarine. When the Admiral finally released her, she didn't collapse, not the way he expected. She dropped to one knee, palms flat on the steel deck, dragging air back into her lungs with the steady cadence of someone trained to breathe through gunpowder, seawater, and pain. Her throat burned. Her vision pulsed. But her mind was a locked weapon safe waiting for the command to open fire. The sailors who had laughed a moment earlier fell quiet. Not out of guilt. Sailors aboard a combat submarine rarely feel guilt. But because something in her posture shifted, sharply and unmistakably. The kind of shift that happens when a service member stops reacting and starts calculating. She stood. Slowly. Deliberately. Boots steady beneath her, spine straight, shoulders squared. And when she looked up, really looked up, every man in that corridor felt the temperature drop 10 degrees. Her eyes met the Admiral's. Not with anger. Anger is loud. She gave him something far more dangerous, silence. A silence that measured the distance between what he was now and what he would be when she was finished with him. No trembling. No tears. No loss of composure. Just a cold assessment, the same she once used to identify insurgent snipers hidden in Afghan dust storms. He thought he had reminded her who he was. But as she adjusted her torn collar, steadying her breathing like a diver before descent, only one truth settled inside her. This wasn't over. And when it ended, he would remember exactly who she was. Because she wasn't the one who broke today. She was the one who marked the target. The vow wasn't spoken. It didn't need to be. It lived in her stare. It lived in the bruise forming beneath her jawline. It lived in the perfect, quiet stillness of a warrior preparing for a counterstrike. And from that moment forward, every breath she took inside that submarine carried this same steady promise. He drew first blood. But she would draw the last. 48 hours before the Admiral's forearm ever touched her throat, she had been sitting in a secure briefing room 3 levels beneath Fleet Headquarters, a room built from reinforced steel and silence. The kind of silence that doesn't simply fill a space, but warns you before the danger does. The overhead fluorescence buzzed with that familiar hum found only in military installations, sterile, cold, unwavering. A digital map of the Pacific Theater glowed across the far wall. Coordinates pulsed. Submarine movement patterns scrolled in quiet precision. Nothing in that room moved except the missions. She waited, hands folded, posture squared, eyes fixed forward. Not impatient. Operators don't get impatient. She simply existed in a state of readiness, the way athletes rest on their toes and soldiers rest on their training. Then the orders came. A file thick with sealed reports. A summary sheet with too many redactions. And a single directive stamped in Department of the Navy ink. Investigate anomalous injury patterns aboard the USS Falcon. Injury patterns. Anomalous. Patterns. In Navy language, that meant only one thing. Someone aboard that submarine had turned training into a weapon. As she reviewed the documents, one detail cut deeper than all the rest. The earliest accident matched the circumstances of her mentor's death. The same compartment, the same drill classification, the same admiral in command. Her mentor had survived insurgent gunfire on foreign soil, only to suffer a so-called equipment malfunction during a simple readiness drill aboard the Falcon. She remembered the folded flag, the funeral silence, the unanswered questions. The Navy investigated, then conveniently closed the case. She never did. Now, command wanted her to reopen the wounds. And yet, their tone was measured. Controlled. Something just beneath polite. A subtle warning laced every sentence. Be thorough, Commander, but don't provoke Admiral Cross. Don't provoke him. They didn't need to say why. Everyone in the upper chain knew the Admiral had political armor thicker than submarine plating. He delivered results. He produced numbers. He had influence. But she had something stronger, resolve forged from loss. So she accepted. Not with enthusiasm. Not with caution. But with the quiet, lethal certainty of someone who had waited too long for this assignment. She stood, saluted, and walked toward the mission that would soon bring her face to face with the man who claimed her mentor's life. And tried to take her breath the same way. The investigation began long before the chokehold. Long before the laughter. Long before the Admiral whispered his threat. It truly began in that steel briefing room. With a file full of concealed damage. And a warrior ready to expose every line of it. The USS Falcon surfaced just long enough to take her aboard, then swallowed itself back into the Pacific without ceremony. That was the first sign. Submarines usually acknowledge new arrivals with a degree of formality. This one didn't. It moved like a creature with something to hide. The moment her boots crossed the brow, the atmosphere changed thick, compressed, unnaturally quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't come from discipline, but from pressure. Human pressure. Fear. Submarines are claustrophobic by nature, steel tunnels, bulkheads tight as arteries, air recycled through machinery older than half the crew. But the Falcon felt different. The red corridor lights cast long shadows that clung to the walls. Every corner had the sensation of being watched. Every step felt like walking deeper into something that did not want her there. Sailors moved around her with forced precision. No idle conversation. No casual glances. Just tight smiles and eyes that shifted away too quickly. They weren't afraid of the environment. They were afraid of the man who controlled it. And he appeared before she even reached the central passageway. Admiral Cross. Tall. Centered. Composed with the rigid stillness of a man who believed he owned every inch of metal beneath his feet. His uniform was crisp enough to cut air. His posture radiated command. His eyes, gray, sharp, assessing, swept over her like a scanner looking for weaknesses. His greeting was technically polite, every word aligned with protocol, every syllable perfectly shaped. But his tone carried the weight of a man reminding her that she had just stepped into his domain. The pressure behind his voice wasn't hospitality. It was boundary setting. Silent territory marking. He looked her over the way experienced commanders evaluate new officers. Not for potential, but for threat level. Behind him, leaning against a valve wheel, stood Chief Mason, the Navy SEAL assigned to the Falcon's security detachment. He said nothing. He rarely did. But his eyes spoke volumes. He had been watching the crew since she boarded. Watching their reactions. Watching the Admiral. Watching her. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He just observed, quiet, controlled, calculating, like a predator evaluating the terrain before movement. As she followed the Admiral deeper into the submarine, the decks vibrated beneath her boots with the rhythmic pulse of the reactor. The narrow corridor tightened around them. She noticed the details: scuffed boots, rushed repairs, hushed conversations that ceased when she approached. The Falcon was operational, but uneasy. In a submarine, culture spreads faster than air. And the culture aboard the Falcon was one thing: fear layered beneath obedience. Every crew member reflected it. Every shadow reinforced it. Every glance confirmed it. And the Admiral took silent satisfaction in all of it. He didn't need to warn her not to challenge him. The submarine itself delivered the message. Chief Mason followed at a distance, not close enough to invite suspicion, but near enough to intervene if needed. His steps were precise, deliberate, measured like a man accustomed to moving into danger without announcing it. From the moment she entered the Falcon, one truth settled into her bones. This wasn't just an assignment. This was a battlefield carved into steel. And the man commanding it knew exactly why she had come. It happened after her first full walkthrough of the submarine. A quiet moment between compartments when the Admiral was out of sight and the oppressive hum of machinery briefly softened. She had paused near a junction of narrow passageways, reviewing structural notes on her tablet, when she sensed movement behind her. Not hostile. Not sloppy. Just hesitant. A young petty officer stepped into view. Uniform slightly wrinkled. Jaw tight. Eyes carrying the kind of exhaustion that doesn't come from lack of sleep, but from holding something in for too long. He didn't salute. Didn't announce himself. He simply stood there, frozen in the narrow red-lit corridor, breathing like a man deciding between fear and duty. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above the ambient hum of the submarine, a whisper designed not to travel past 2 feet. He didn't ask who she was. He didn't need to. The Falcon was too small, too tense, too controlled for rumors not to spread the second she boarded. He glanced down both ends of the passageway, checking for shadows that didn't belong. Only then did he step closer, close enough for his words to reach her, far enough to keep plausible distance if anyone walked past. What he shared wasn't a conversation. It was a confession born from fear. Sailors injured during drills. Chokeholds held too long. Consciousness lost. Bruises concealed under uniforms. Reports rewritten. Complaints buried. Every incident had one common denominator: the Admiral's training sessions. And every attempt to speak up had been met with the same outcome: disappearing paperwork, sudden transfers, evaluations altered without explanation. The crew had stopped believing the system would protect them. Stopped expecting justice. Stopped hoping for change. But this young petty officer hadn't stopped noticing. He leaned in just slightly, enough for the red corridor light to catch the fear in his eyes. Not fear of her. Fear of what would happen if anyone saw him talking to her. Then came the warning. The one he had probably debated giving since the moment she stepped aboard. If he thinks you're here to expose him, he will test you. Not might. Not could. Will. It wasn't a threat. It wasn't speculation. It was a statement carved from experience, hard, unpolished, and honest. She didn't respond. She didn't need to. Operators know that silence protects more than words ever can. The petty officer stepped back into the narrow artery of the submarine, swallowed by shadows and routine, returning to his duties as if he had never spoken. But his message stayed with her. Aboard the Falcon, the danger wasn't hidden. It was structured, institutional, calculated. And the man at the center of it, Admiral Cross, didn't just command the submarine. He weaponized it. The warning was simple, direct, and unmistakable. He will come for you. He will push you. He will try to break you. She took a slow breath, the recycled air sharp in her lungs. Good. Let him try. Her first full day of observation unfolded like a controlled illusion, polished, rehearsed, and engineered for her benefit. Official drills began at 0600, and the Admiral ran them with surgical precision. Every hold demonstrated by the book. Every maneuver explained with textbook clarity. Every release executed at the exact second protocol required. If she had been a surface-level inspector, she might have believed it. But she wasn't. She watched the Admiral the way experienced operators watch insurgent leaders. Not during the speeches, but in the moments in between. During the official drills, he performed flawlessly. Not a second out of step. Not an ounce of force misapplied. He smiled at the observers. He corrected sailors gently. He narrated technique with the patience of a mentor. It was a performance. And like all performances, it cracked when the cameras shut off. The first shift came subtle. A quiet drill conducted in a dim corner of the training bay, beyond the central line of sight. A chokehold held a hair longer than necessary. A hand pressing down on a recruit's spine with just enough force to elicit pain, but not enough to leave marks visible in uniform. Then the second shift, pressure. Not enough to break bones, but enough to break trust. He leaned his weight onto sailors during grappling to force panic. He applied joint locks with an angle designed to remind them who held authority. He released holds half a second late, then a full second late, then two. Always small enough to deny, always long enough to dominate. And when a sailor flinched or hesitated, his response was never verbal. It was humiliation. A hand shoved against the deck. A shoulder pinned harder than necessary. A grip tightened just a fraction more. A quiet murmur only the trainee could hear. Submarines magnify every sin. There is no space to escape the physics of dominance. She documented everything. Small details, timing variations, micro delays, the shift in his weight, the tightening of his forearm muscles, the widening of a sailor's eyes just before the panic response. Her notes were clinical, cold, precise. Patterns built themselves. He didn't lose control, he exerted it. He wasn't teaching resilience. He was cultivating fear. And the sailors responded the way victims of authority always do when they cannot escape. They obeyed faster, moved quieter, breathed smaller. Every drill without cameras was different. More aggressive, more invasive, more about him than the training. She watched, recorded, measured. By midday, she no longer saw a commanding officer. She saw a predator, one who had discovered a hunting ground with no oversight, and a prey population trained to remain silent. She understood then what the petty officer's warning truly meant. This wasn't just misconduct. This was pattern behavior, refined, practiced, perfected. A system of domination. A hierarchy built on fear. A leader who weaponized regulation gaps and hid behind perfect official performance. In the spotless precision of his public drills. And the quiet brutality of his private ones. The truth settled into her bones. Admiral Cross wasn't enforcing discipline. He was feeding off power. And predators like him never stop on their own. They stop only when someone stronger forces them to. Someone who sees through the mask. Someone who can take a punch and return with proof. Someone he can't control, can't intimidate, and can't silence. He didn't know it yet. But she was already building the case that would end him. It arrived at 1840 hours, an anonymous text coming through a restricted internal channel. Short, clean, devoid of signature. Voluntary drill tonight. No cameras. No cameras. On any military vessel, especially a submarine, that phrase meant one thing. Whatever happens will not exist. She stared at the message for a moment, not out of hesitation, but calculation. Predators escalate when they sense observation. They become bold when they believe the shadows belong to them. And tonight, those shadows were waiting. She went. The USS Falcon was quieter during night cycles. The hum of machinery seemed heavier, the air hotter, the metal walls closer. Submarines sleep by red light after hours, dim, pulsing, claustrophobic. Every corridor looked like a narrow artery lined with pressure and secrecy. As she approached the designated compartment, She felt the temperature shift first. Not actual heat, human heat. Bodies packed too close together for training protocol. Energy thick with anticipation. Then she saw them. Crew members pressed shoulder to shoulder along the narrow passageway. Too many for a real drill. Too silent for casual gathering. Their postures stiff, their eyes avoiding hers, their breaths shallow in the overheated space. The red lights overhead flickered on a low power cycle, turning the steel corridor into a tunnel of shadows. It felt like descending into the throat of something alive. At the center of it, waiting for her like a man receiving a scheduled offering, stood Admiral Cross. Hands behind his back. Feet planted exactly shoulder-width apart. Expression composed with the confidence of someone who had orchestrated every detail of this moment. And in that second, she understood. This wasn't training. This wasn't readiness. This wasn't discipline. This was theater. A staging ground dressed as a drill. A crowd positioned as witnesses. A corridor selected for narrow confines, limited movement, and no escape. He wasn't testing her skill. He was testing her resilience. Testing her silence. Testing whether she would fold the way others had folded. She stepped forward anyway. Not because she underestimated the danger, but because the danger was exactly what she needed him to reveal. Her boots echoed once against the metal deck. A single crisp sound swallowed by the oppressive pressure of bodies and heat and waiting. The Admiral took one step toward her. Just one. But in the confined tunnel, it felt like a closing trap. Every sailor present knew what was coming. Every one of them had seen a version of it before. And not one of them moved to intervene. Not because they agreed, but because fear had rewired their loyalty. This wasn't a drill. This wasn't an accident. This was an ambush. Designed to break her. In the exact place where no official eyes could see. And no recording could survive. She did not retreat. Did not hesitate. Did not shift her stance. Because predators overplay their hand when they believe the room belongs to them. And tonight, the Admiral believed the Falcon belonged to him. He didn't realize that the trap he built was already closing around him. The moment she crossed the threshold of the corridor, the Admiral moved. Not fast, not frantic, but with the deliberate precision of a man who had practiced this choreography on others many times before. He closed the distance in a single controlled step and slammed her back into the bulkhead. The impact shook the valve wheel beside her head and rattled a loose pipe overhead. Steel met spine. Air flew from her lungs in a silent burst. His forearm rose like a hydraulic bar and crushed across her throat. Not sloppy. Not chaotic. Perfectly placed, just above the clavicle, angled to restrict airflow and blood flow simultaneously. A hold taught in survival schools, applied here as domination. Her boots scraped against the deck, searching for leverage that didn't exist in the cramped corridor. Metal pressed into her shoulder blades. Heat radiated from bodies packed around her. The recycled air tasted sharper, thinner. The crew reacted exactly as he knew they would. Laughter erupted first, short, nervous, forced. Then came the encouragement, the shouts, the mocking whistles. Hands pointed. Smirks spread. They weren't monsters. They were conditioned by fear to applaud the monster in command. She tapped his forearm once. Clean. Precise. Regulation clear. He didn't flinch. She tapped twice, the emergency signal recognized across every branch of service. The universal plea for release. He tightened. His deltoid flexed, forearm shifting a fraction deeper into the soft tissue of her throat. Her airway compressed further. Her peripheral vision dimmed. A fog crept inward from the edges, threatening blackout. Her pulse hammered violently beneath his pressure. The Admiral leaned his weight into the choke, turning his body into a wall of calculated force. Behind the crowd, unmoving, unspeaking, watching with predatory stillness, stood Chief Mason. Unlike the sailors, he didn't cheer. He didn't react. He studied. His eyes tracked the exact placement of the Admiral's forearm. The angle of pressure. The torque of the shoulders. The timing between her tap and the Admiral's refusal to release. He wasn't watching a fight. He was gathering intelligence. She felt the corridor tilt in her vision. The ringing in her ears deepened. Her grip tightened on his wrist, not from panic. She had been trained out of panic, but from the physiological crash of oxygen loss. She knew she was seconds from losing consciousness. And that was when he released. Not out of mercy. Out of choice. The kind of choice predators make when they believe they have delivered enough of a message. His forearm lifted away with slow, arrogant satisfaction. Air flooded into her throat like fire. Her knees buckled, but she forced herself to remain upright, refusing him the satisfaction of collapse. The laughter faded as sailors sensed the tension shift. Not away from danger, but toward something colder, heavier, far more silent. The Admiral believed he had demonstrated dominance. Believed he had reminded her of hierarchy. Believed he had broken the will of yet another sailor on his submarine. He didn't see the calculation behind her eyes. Didn't recognize the exact moment she locked this incident into the chain of evidence she was building. Didn't realize the SEAL had just committed every detail to memory. He thought he had won. But in truth, he had just given her everything she needed. She didn't go to sickbay. Didn't seek attention. Didn't report the incident through channels designed to fail. She walked the length of the submarine with the silent control of someone who had endured far worse in combat zones and survived all of it. Her throat throbbed in bruised pulses, each beat a reminder of the Admiral's arrogance, each step a reminder of what she was about to do. Chief Mason found her before she reached her quarters. Not through words, through presence. He appeared in the shadow of a bulkhead, arms folded, posture relaxed in the way trained operators adopt when they want to avoid drawing attention. His eyes scanned her throat, noting the swelling, the discoloration, the pattern of pressure. Analysis, not sympathy. He jerked his head toward a maintenance compartment. A silent order. She followed. Inside, the compartment was barely larger than a storage locker, pipes snaking overhead, emergency equipment stacked neatly against the walls. Mason closed the hatch behind them, isolating them from the rest of the Falcon. The submarine's hum felt louder in the confined space, vibrating through the deck plates into their boots. Then he showed her the truth. A small, ruggedized data drive. Submarine issued. Unauthorized for private storage. Hidden for months. He plugged it into a handheld tablet. Footage flickered to life. The corridor where she had been choked appeared first, captured from an angle the Admiral didn't know existed. A hidden lens embedded behind a maintenance panel, installed long before she arrived. It recorded everything in cold infrared clarity, the slam, the choke, the taps, the delayed release. But that wasn't all. Mason swiped through additional files. Logs. Timestamps. Injury reports that never reached upper command. Contusions labeled as training stress. Fractures attributed to slips on wet deck. A concussion blamed on improper footing. Patterns she had already noted, now backed by digital evidence. Then came the statements, handwritten, hurried, signed under pressure. Sailors describing holds that didn't release. Drills that crossed from training into punishment. Fear disguised as discipline. Statements that had vanished from official logs, but not from the Falcon itself. This wasn't negligence. It was suppression. A system built to protect the man who should have been removed long ago. In that cramped compartment, surrounded by the submarine's skeleton of steel and wiring, she and the SEAL formed the kind of alliance forged only by necessity and mutual conviction. They organized the data, cross-referenced timestamps, mapped incidents to specific drills, constructed a timeline of abuse long enough to sink careers. But Mason was clear. What they had was damning, but incomplete. The Navy cares about chain of custody, visibility, protocol. Evidence gathered unofficially can be dismissed unofficially. They needed one more incident. Not hidden. Not in shadows. not whispered about in corridors. One more violation committed in the open. Under supervision. With official cameras rolling. With the Admiral believing he still controlled the room. An incident he wouldn't be able to deny, manipulate, or bury. And she knew exactly how to get it. They built the plan with the efficiency of a strike team. A formal combat readiness evaluation. Mandatory recording systems active. JAG present. Senior command observing. Admiral Cross required to demonstrate protocol on camera. They would give him the stage. He would give them his downfall. Because predators cannot resist opportunity. They cannot suppress their patterns. They cannot hide who they are when ego is challenged. He had tested her. Now she would test him. But this time, the submarine wouldn't be the weapon. The truth would. The request went through the proper channels, clean, procedural, unassailable. A formal combat readiness evaluation, logged at 0700, time-stamped, acknowledged by command, and forwarded to every required officer aboard the USS Falcon. There was no way to ignore it, no way to decline it without raising flags far above Admiral Cross's authority. By noon, the submarine had shifted into full inspection posture. The central training bay, normally cramped, utilitarian, dim, had been transformed into a controlled evaluation environment. Overhead white lights replaced the usual red glow. Every corner held a mounted camera with timecode running. The crew assembled along the perimeter, forced into rigid formation by protocol, but visibly unsettled by the sudden presence of higher authority. 2 Judge Advocate General officers occupied the front row, clipboards in hand, eyes sharp and unemotional. Their mere presence altered the atmosphere. JAG officers don't observe for performance, they observe for violations. They smell misconduct the way sonar detects hostile steel in open water. Senior command followed, standing with folded arms, posture neutral, expression unreadable. They weren't there to applaud. They weren't there to critique. They were there because someone with influence, had informed them this evaluation mattered. And at the center of it all, dressed in flawless uniform and wearing the polished composure of a man confident in his own facade, stood Admiral Cross, the perfect actor, stepping onto the perfect stage. The demonstration began with selected sailors. Clean movements. Regulation holds. Measured pressure. Perfect timing. Every maneuver flowed like a manual played in real time. Cross corrected form. Cross praised technique. Cross delivered instruction with the voice of a model commander. He smiled in ways he hadn't smiled in months. He knew he was being watched. He knew the cameras rolled. He knew the chain of command was observing. He knew how to perform. With each sailor, he executed the textbook version of the very drills he had corrupted behind closed doors. Nothing excessive. Nothing questionable. Nothing that revealed the predator beneath the protocol. He moved with confidence, precision, and a thin sheen of triumph. If the evaluation ended there, he would have passed with distinction. But evaluations never end on the second-to-last demonstration. And she had waited precisely for this moment. When the final volunteer slot was called, she stepped forward with steady boots and a throat still marked from the choke he assumed no one had seen. The room shifted. Air tightened. Even the JAG officers raised their eyes, sensing the subtle shift in tension. Admiral Cross acknowledged her with a courteous nod. But his pupils constricted. His posture stiffened. And his breathing slowed just enough for trained eyes to detect the change. Predators sense threats long before they recognize them. She took her position across from him on the padded deck. Calm. Centered. Unmoving. This wasn't defiance. This wasn't arrogance. This was the moment Mason had predicted, the moment they engineered, the moment she needed. The moment the Admiral would be unable to hide who he truly was. The cameras zoomed in. Command leaned forward. The crew held their breath. He set his stance. She mirrored it. Protocol dictated the next movements. But protocol had never stopped him before. And as the two of them locked eyes under the unforgiving lights of official oversight, one truth hovered in the charged space between them. Tonight's chokehold had been for intimidation. This one, if he slipped, would be his undoing. She had volunteered for the final demonstration because she knew exactly what would happen when his ego collided with exposure. And the Admiral, blinded by pride and conditioned by impunity, was about to step directly into the trap she built. The room was silent as they squared off, silent in the way only military spaces become when everyone present knows a line is about to be crossed. The kind of silence that feels like pressure building inside a sealed steel hull. She stepped into position. He mirrored her. Two bodies centered on a padded deck, surrounded by witnesses who had never seen the Admiral challenged, not officially, not publicly, not under the bright, impartial eye of recorded scrutiny. The demonstration began with a standard sequence: grappling entry, controlled pivot, joint isolation. She executed every movement with crisp precision, matching him measure for measure. For the first minute, it was textbook. Professional. Deceptively calm. Then she introduced resistance. Not enough to break form. Not enough to violate protocol. Just enough. Enough to touch the nerve he couldn't control, his ego. The shift in him was instantaneous. His shoulders tensed. His jaw tightened. The subtle patience he'd worn like an officer's badge evaporated. He engaged harder. He redirected her stance with unnecessary force, attempting to disrupt her balance. She corrected smoothly, refusing to give him the misstep he wanted. That refusal, quiet, steady, unapologetic, ignited the instinct he had buried beneath layers of protocol for years. His hand snapped up. His arm locked around her neck. And without waiting for the required verbal cue to begin the choke demonstration, he initiated the hold. But this time, there were cameras. This time, there was Jag. This time, there was no corridor shadow to hide in. She tapped once. A clean, unmistakable tap of regulation. The Admiral didn't release. If anything, his forearm pressed deeper, angling the choke to restrict both airway and blood flow, an aggressive variant that had no place in a controlled demonstration. Her second tap hit harder. Urgent. Command clear. He held. The pressure increased. Her carotid pulse stuttered beneath his grip. Her boots dragged half an inch on the mat. Her balance wavered under the controlled oxygen drop. And the entire room saw it. Not whispered. Not rumored. Not hidden in dim red light. But under full illumination, before officers trained to read violations the way sonar reads enemy signatures. Two JAG officers rose in unison. Chairs scraped. Clipboards dropped against their sides. Tension surged through the crew like an electrical spike. Admiral Cross realized too late that he was no longer reenacting dominance. He was committing it. His mistake wasn't the choke itself. It was the refusal to release. The refusal captured in real time. From 3 angles. With clear audio. With witnesses who could no longer pretend they didn't see what they saw every day without oversight. Her vision dimmed at the edges, but she stayed conscious long enough for the moment to break, long enough for the Admiral to realize the atmosphere around him had shifted from compliance to horror. When he finally released, slower than any protocol allowed, the silence in the training bay was no longer fear. It was evidence. And every officer present knew it. The mask he had worn for years. Fractured in a single, public second. The Admiral's arm had barely left her throat when the atmosphere inside the training bay shifted from tension to reckoning. JAG officers moved first, stepping forward with the sharp, controlled urgency of people trained to react only when a violation is unmistakable. Their eyes locked onto Cross, not with alarm, but with confirmation. They had seen what they needed. But the downfall was only beginning. Chief Mason stepped out from the wall of sailors with the calm precision of an operator entering a known kill zone. He carried a tablet tucked under one arm, standard Navy issue, nothing suspicious, nothing dramatic. Yet every person in that room felt the weight of it. He didn't address the Admiral. He didn't address the crowd. He simply plugged the device into the central display port, triggering the overhead monitor to life. Footage appeared. Not recent. Not staged. Not rehearsed. The infrared corridor video from 2 nights earlier. The chokehold. The laughter. The taps ignored. The tightening grip. The near blackout. Every angle was clear. Every timestamp synced. Every facial expression visible. The room froze. He played the next file. Another sailor slammed into a bulkhead. A choke held too long. A knee pressing into a spine. Fear disguised as training. Another file. A young recruit collapsing after a delayed release. Another. A sailor shaking as he signed a statement later recorded as withdrawn. Another. The exact compartment where her mentor had died. A drill mislabeled, footage erased from official logs, but preserved here in the Falcon's hidden memory. Then the suppressed reports. Digital signatures. Dates. Edits. Revisions. Complaints overwritten by superior officers who had protected Cross from consequences long overdue. Each file struck harder than the last. A precise, chronological documentation of misconduct spanning months. Some sailors looked away. Some stared into the floor. Others watched with the hollow shock of men seeing the truth they had lived beneath finally displayed in the open. The Admiral tried to speak, but a JAG officer raised a hand. Not in politeness. In command. Silence reclaimed the room. The verdict came fast. JAG officers conferred briefly, 90 seconds of quiet, professional exchange. Before turning toward him with the cold finality of men delivering lawful judgment. They suspended Admiral Cross on the spot. Not temporary. Not pending review. Immediate. His command codes revoked. His access stripped. His authority nullified. And then came the next blow. The unexpected one. Senior command stepped forward and placed a hand on the shoulder of the officer who had been shielding Cross for months. The superior who had buried complaints. The man who had called injuries accidents and warnings overreactions. He too was relieved of duty. Escorted out alongside the Admiral. No rank could protect them now. Not from evidence this complete. Not from truth this visible. Not from a room full of witnesses who had just watched the downfall unfold frame by frame in undeniable clarity. The training bay, moments ago a stage for dominance, had become a courtroom without walls, a tribunal carved from steel and truth. And in that chamber of consequence, the ship itself seemed to breathe differently. Lighter, freer, unshackled. The Falcon no longer belonged to the Predator. It belonged to the truth. The fallout spread through the USS Falcon in quiet waves, no shouting, no chaos, just the heavy, unmistakable shift that follows the removal of a corrupt center of gravity. Without the Admiral's shadow bearing down on them, sailors stood straighter. Movements steadied. Breathing patterns changed. The submarine felt different. Lighter. Cleaner. Honest. When command formally assumed control of the vessel, the decision came swiftly. She was appointed to lead a restructured combat readiness program, one built not on intimidation, but on discipline, skill, and respect for the human beings who wore the uniform. The announcement carried the weight of both justice and restoration. The Falcon needed a new spine. They chose hers. Chief Mason, whose silence had been as sharp as any weapon, was assigned as her second-in-command. It wasn't a reward. It was alignment, putting the right operator in the right place, beside the right leader at the right time. Together, they tore down the old system piece by piece. Training modules rewritten. Chokehold regulations reinforced. Emergency tap protocols outlined in language that left no room for ambiguity. Hidden cameras registered into official channels. Anonymous reporting reinstated. Accountability restored. The crew, once paralyzed, began to reclaim their confidence. Sailors who had once whispered now asked questions. Those who had feared drills now executed them with precision instead of dread. The submarine did not magically forget its past, but for the first time in months, it had a future shaped by integrity, not intimidation. When the reformation schedule was complete, she walked alone into the quiet of her quarters. The ship hummed around her in the steady, familiar rhythm of metal and ocean, no longer hostile, no longer oppressive. She reached into her locker and pulled out the one item she had carried through every deployment, her mentor's photograph. Edges worn, colors fading, expression steady. The man whose death had been buried under lies. The man whose legacy she had carried into the Falcon. The man whose memory had sharpened her resolve every time the Admiral tightened his grip. She held the photo for a long moment, letting the silence settle. No tears. No trembling. Just the quiet exhale of someone who had seen justice delivered in full measure. Then she whispered, not to the room, not to the submarine, but to the memory that had guided her through every step. I didn't forget you. And neither will they. It wasn't a goodbye. It was a closure measured in truth, earned through endurance, and sealed by consequence. And aboard the USS Falcon, a new legacy began. One built not by the man who had ruled through fear, but by the woman who refused to break beneath it.